I have always loved photography. For me, a camera is not just a tool, but a way to freeze a moment, to see beauty in small things that escape the gaze of others. But this year, my photos have acquired a completely different meaning. Stephen, his face, his smile, his gaze, all of this captivated me from the first day of school. The leader of our group, talented, kind, and incredibly attractive, he was something unattainable for me. I knew that I had no chance, and yet I could not stop thinking about him. I found a way to get closer. The camera became my salvation and my curse. Secret shots of Stephen were my secret. I photographed him in lectures, in the library, when he fell asleep on his desk after a long day of studying. I even took a picture once when he was in the shower, taking advantage of the fact that we lived in the same dorm. These photos were my treasure. Every time I looked at them, I felt closer to him, as if I could decipher his thoughts, understand him better. This was my secret life that no one was supposed to know. But one day everything went wrong. It was a normal school day. I was sitting in the classroom waiting for the lecture to start. Time was passing slowly, and to distract myself, I decided to look through the photos on my camera. I hid it behind my desk so no one would notice, but it seems I made a mistake. "Hey, David!" The voice sounded unexpectedly close. I looked up and saw Anthony, my classmate. He was standing too close and his gaze was strange, tenacious, studying. "What do you want?" I asked, trying not to show how nervous I was. "Just curious." He grinned and I realized that something was wrong. He sat down next to me and I quickly hid the camera, but it was too late. Anthony noticed something he shouldn't have seen. "What are you hiding there?" he asked, his voice deliberately friendly, but there was a threat in it. "It's nothing." I tried to brush it off. "Really?" His grin widened. "You know, I saw something. It seems you are too fascinated with our headman." I felt a chill inside. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but my voice still wavered. "About your photographs," he said quietly. "I think Stephen would be interested to know how you keep tabs on him." I felt my face flush. It was over. Anthony knew, and now my secret was no longer just mine. "You won't tell anyone anything," I said, more pleading than threatening. "Perhaps," he said, lowering his voice. "But it will depend on you, David." His words sounded like a death sentence. Anthony stood up, casting one last glance at me and left. I sat there, feeling my insides turning over. I was at his mercy now, and that scared me more than anything. The next day, it all started. We were sitting in a lecture, and when the teacher asked us to review the topics for the project, Anthony suddenly sat down next to us. "Hello, partner," he said with a wide smile that didn't look at all friendly. "What do you want?" I asked, trying not to look in his direction. "I just thought we could work together." His voice was quiet, so no one else could hear. "You don't mind, do you?" I didn't answer. He leaned closer, and his words became almost a whisper. "Otherwise, our dear Stephen will find out what plans you have for him." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't let this happen. "Okay," I squeezed out through my teeth, feeling everything inside me tighten. Things got worse that evening. I was trying to focus on studying for the next day's class when I got a text on my phone. It was Anthony. "David, I need to talk to you. I'll meet you at the dorm in 10 minutes. I wanted to ignore it, but I knew that would only make things worse. I got dressed and went outside. Anthony was already waiting, leaning against the wall with that smug look on his face. "You are punctual, that's good," he said as soon as I approached. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to hide my fear. "Nothing special," he replied, bowing his head. "I just want to make sure you're willing to comply with my terms." "What other conditions?" He chuckled. "Very simple. You do what I say, and I keep your little secret to myself." "This is blackmail," I whispered, feeling anger rising inside me. "Exactly," he confirmed with a grin, "and I'm good at it." I remained silent. There was no point in resisting. "See you tomorrow, David," he added, pushing off the wall and walking away. "And don't forget to smile." The next day was even worse. During recess, as we were standing in the hallway, Anthony approached me with a bunch of our classmates. "Hey, David," he began loudly so that everyone could hear. "Show us your best shots." I hear you're a great photographer." I felt panic creeping up on me. He knew I had a camera with me, and he knew perfectly well that I couldn't show him what was inside. "I don't have time now," I answered quickly. "I need to go to extra classes." "Okay then," he said with feigned disappointment. "But don't forget to show us later." The others laughed, unsuspecting, but I saw Anthony looking at me, enjoying my helplessness. When we were alone after class, he came up to me again. "You got out of it very well," he said, leaning on the desk. "But next time, be prepared." "What do you want?" I asked, no longer trying to hide my anger. "So far, nothing complicated. Just be ready to obey. Otherwise, you know what will happen." The next day, Anthony texted me again. "You come to me this evening. You know the address. If not, ask. Better not make me remind you what will happen if you don't come." I read these lines several times, feeling my insides tighten. I wanted to resist, wanted to say that I wouldn't go anywhere, but I knew it was useless. I had no other choice. I stood at his door that evening. My heart was beating so loudly that it seemed you could hear it from outside. I knocked, and a moment later the door opened. "Hello, David," Anthony said with that same smirk I had begun to hate. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to hide my fear. He gestured for me to come in. I stepped inside, feeling the tension become unbearable. "Relax," he said, closing the door. "Today we're just going to spend time together." "Is this your way of saying that you're going to blackmail me again?" I asked, looking at him. Anthony chuckled. "Number. Although if you refuse, then perhaps I will have to." I gritted my teeth to keep my emotions in. He sat down on the couch and gestured to the seat next to me. "Sit down, don't be afraid," he said, his tone becoming softer, almost soothing. I sat up reluctantly, feeling him approaching. "David, you do realize I'm not that bad, right?" he said, looking me straight in the eye. "You're blackmailing me," I answered shortly. "Only because you left me no choice," he said, his voice too confident. "You're keeping a secret that I could reveal. But I'm not doing that, am I?" His hand touched mine and I jerked away. "What are you doing?" "Relax," he said again. "I like you, David, and I want you to know that." "You're using me, Anthony," I said, keeping my voice level with difficulty. "Maybe, but don't you find it exciting?" "No, that's disgusting of you." To which I received the answer that if I like fantasizing about Steven so much, then I am not against bringing his wishes into life. He told me to start drying his instrument until it was at its peak. I said I wouldn't do it. To which he immediately interrupted me and said that he had already prepared a letter to the dean's office and a university chat about your photos. I couldn't stand being found out and thrown out in disgrace. I unzipped his pants and started working with my hand first. It was so disgusting. But literally a second later, he grabbed me by the hair and impaled me on the instrument. I choked a little. To my surprise, it didn't last long, about 3 to 4 minutes, but I thought that was the end. He grabbed me and turned me around. He started twisting my arm and then used his tool. We had sex. Well, to be more precise, this freak had sex with me. When it was all over, I felt like something inside me had broken. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't stay in that room for a second longer. "Can I go?" I asked quietly. Anthony leaned closer, his smile returning. "Of course, but don't forget, you're my property now." Anthony seemed to relish his power. He always found a way to remind me that I was in his hands. During breaks, he would sit next to me, playfully touch my shoulder, or speak to me louder than necessary, drawing my attention. "David, have you forgotten our agreement?" he said quietly one day when we were alone in the classroom. "I remember," I answered, trying to hide the anger in my voice. "Excellent. You know that I can be very persuasive if necessary." I gritted my teeth but said nothing. The next day, things got even worse. During class, as Steven was handing out handouts for a test, Anthony leaned over to me and whispered, "I have this tonight. Don't be late." I wanted to object, but his look made it clear that this was not a request. When class was over, I packed my things and was about to leave, but Steven came up to me. "David," he began, smiling, "do you have a minute?" My heart sank. I didn't expect Steven to talk to me now. "Of course," I answered, trying to sound calm. "We need to discuss a plan for the group of photographers. You know there's a competition coming up, right?" I nodded. glad that Stephen had reached out to me. We talked about the competition, about what kind of work to send, and it was like a release for me. But the joy quickly faded when I received a message from Anthony. "If you're not here in half an hour, I'll send the photo to Stephen." I felt like everything inside me was breaking. I couldn't let this happen. "Stephen, I have to go," I said, trying to hide my anxiety. "We'll talk later?" "Of course," he replied. "Good luck." I quickly left, feeling my joy turn to fear. When I came to Anthony, he greeted me with his usual grin. "Well done for coming." "You left me no choice," I said, feeling anger rising inside me. "Exactly, because I always get what I want," he replied, his tone cold. He started manipulating me again, forcing me to do things I didn't want to do. Each such encounter destroyed me from the inside, but I knew that it was useless to resist. At some point, I just stopped going to university. I thought it would help, that if I disappeared, Anthony would leave me alone. But it turned out to be a mistake. Messages started coming more and more frequently. "Where are you? You think you can hide? You can't." Each of them was like a blow. I understood that I had no way out. To protect Stephen and feel a little more confident, I started spending more time with him. We became closer, talked more often. He was always kind to me, asked about my photos, asked my opinion. But even that didn't make me feel safe. Anthony was everywhere, stalking me in the locker room before gym, finding moments when we were alone and calling me back. The days were running together in a painful sequence. I tried to pretend that everything was okay, especially around Stephen. But inside, I was torn apart by fear and anger. Anthony kept holding me in his arms, and I saw no way out. During the next break, he found me again. We were standing in the corridor, and I tried to avoid his gaze. "David, I'm glad you're finally starting to understand how our agreement works," he said, smiling as if we were talking about something harmless. "What do you want this time?" I asked quietly, trying to make sure no one around us heard. "I have it this evening." His tone became firmer. "Don't make me repeat it." I wanted to say no. I wanted to finally confront him, but instead I just nodded. Anthony knew where to hurt me the most, and once again I was powerless. That evening I approached his door feeling trapped. It seemed to me that I had stood there once before, feeling the same sense of helplessness. Anthony opened the door with his usual smirk. "Good evening, David," he said, stepping aside for me to enter. "Can we get this over with quickly?" I asked as I stepped inside. "Are you in a hurry?" he laughed. "No, David, we are in no hurry today." I sat on the edge of the couch, trying not to look him in the eye. Anthony sat down next to me, his tone changing, almost softening. "Why are you always so tense?" he asked, leaning closer. "Because you're making me do things I don't want to do," I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. He chuckled. "But you still do it." He stood in front of me and pulled down his pants, and I was already drying his tool again. He did not spare anything in me, and did it the way he wanted and how he liked, after which we had sex again. After that, he stood up and took my face in his hands, forcing me to look into his eyes. "Remember, David, I need you, so don't try to run away." The words sounded like a threat, but there was something else in his gaze that made me feel even worse. When I got back to the dorm, I sat on my bed for a long time, staring into space. I tried to figure out why this was still happening, why I kept submitting. Later that night, Stephen texted me. "David, are you okay? You look tired today. If something is wrong, tell me." I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Thanks, Stephen. I'm fine, just tired." But it was actually a lie. Nothing was normal. That night was another reminder of how messed up I was. I knew things couldn't go on like this, but I didn't know how to stop it. We often stayed in the library after classes, preparing projects for our photo club. Those hours were my salvation. I would watch him, listen to him talk passionately about his ideas, and for a moment, I would forget about everything. One evening we were staying late again. The library was almost empty, leaving the two of us at the table. I was fiddling with the camera, checking the settings, when Stephen suddenly broke the silence. "David," he began, and I felt everything inside me freeze. "Yes," I answered, trying to sound calm. He put his pen down and looked at me. His gaze was serious but warm. "You know that I like working with you, right?" I nodded, not quite understanding what he was getting at. "But it's not just that," he continued. "I think I like you." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to say. Stephen looked at me, waiting for an answer, but the words stuck in my throat. "You don't want to say anything?" he asked, his voice shaking. I began, feeling panic rising in me. "Stephen, this is unexpected." He smiled, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "You have time to think about it. I just wanted you to know that." When he left, I sat at the table, feeling torn between contradictions. This was the moment I had dreamed of, but now it was unbearably difficult for me. The next day I made a decision. I couldn't continue living in fear and lies. I couldn't be Anthony's plaything anymore. In the evening, I found myself at his door again. He opened it as usual with a grin on his face. "What, are you bored already?" he asked, smiling. "We need to talk," I said firmly, walking inside. His gaze became wary. "What do you want to talk about?" he asked, sitting down on the sofa and gesturing for me to sit opposite him. I didn't sit down. Instead, I took out the flash drive and held it up for him to see. "Here are all the photographs you used to hold me in your arms," I said, looking him straight in the eyes. His gaze changed slightly, but he quickly pulled himself together. "So what? Do you think this will change anything?" "It will change everything," I answered firmly, "because I'm not afraid anymore." Anthony stood up, his face serious. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, David. Do you think you can just end this?" "Yes," I said, feeling confidence growing inside me. "This is the end." "What are you going to do? Go to Stephen? Tell him everything? You know he'll turn his back on you." His words were full of venom. "Perhaps," I admitted. "But it's better than continuing to live in fear." Anthony was silent, his face tense. He was trying to think of something, but I wasn't listening anymore. I turned and headed for the door. "You'll regret it, David," I heard behind me. I stopped for a moment, turned around and said, "Perhaps, but now it's my decision." When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I knew there was more to come, but this step was the first to freedom. Stephen had set up the meeting himself. He had suggested that we meet at the university as usual to discuss the club's upcoming plans. But I knew that today's conversation would be different. When I approached, Stephen was standing by the fountain, holding a tablet with some notes in his hands. His face, as always, radiated calm and concentration. "David," he said, noticing me. "Hello," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. He smiled and motioned for me to sit down next to him. We talked a little about the project, about which pictures would be best to choose for the competition. But my thoughts were elsewhere. "Did you want to say something?" Stephen asked, noticing how nervous I was. I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts. "Yes, there is something you should know." His gaze became serious. "Did something happen?" "This concerns me, and you," I began, feeling the words stick in my throat. "Remember how I said I was into photography?" "Of course. You always take great pictures," he replied with a slight smile. "But I took pictures I shouldn't have," I said, looking down. Stephen paused, waiting for him to continue. I took out the flash drive and handed it to him. "There are pictures of you on this flash drive," I said, feeling my face grow hot. "I took some of them when you didn't know about it." His face froze. He took the flash drive but didn't look at it right away. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice becoming a little quieter. "Yes," I said, feeling a weight settle on my shoulders. I was obsessed with you, and I know it's wrong. I came here to confess." Stephen was silent. His gaze became heavy, and I could see that he was struggling with his emotions. Finally, he said, "Why did you do this?" "Because I loved you," I said, looking him straight in the eyes. But I didn't know how to say it. He clutched the flash drive in his hand, his jaw tensing. "You realize this is weird? That this is not normal?" "I know," I replied, feeling my voice tremble, "and I'm ready to accept any consequences." Stephen stood up, his movements jerky. "I need to think," he said. I understand, I replied quietly. But please know, I'm sorry. He looked at me, and there was more disappointment in his gaze than anger. I'll contact you later, David. With these words, he left, leaving me alone. I spent the rest of the day in emptiness. Inside, there was only a feeling of loss and regret. I did not know if he would forgive me, but I was ready to accept his decision. That night I sat by the window, looking out at the rain, and thought that maybe my love for Stephen had ruined everything we could have had. After talking to Stephen, I felt like my world had collapsed. I knew I had done the right thing by telling the truth, but now every hour I waited for his answer felt like an eternity. He didn't write or call. I tried to distract myself, studied, took pictures of the landscapes, but thoughts about Stephen did not leave me. I went over all the possible scenarios in my head. Would he forgive me, or turn away forever? On the 5th day, when I was already starting to lose hope, the phone rang. It was him. Hello, David. His voice sounded tense. Hi, Stephen. I stood up immediately, feeling everything inside me tense up. Can you meet tonight? He asked, and I heard a hint of doubt in his tone. Of course, I answered, trying to sound calm. He gave the place and time, and we said goodbye. I sat with the phone in my hands for a few more minutes, trying to comprehend what this could be. I spent the whole day thinking, waiting for the meeting. I knew it was my chance to explain everything, but I was afraid that he had already made his decision. When evening came, I arrived early. Stephen was standing by an old bench in the park, looking at the fallen leaves. His silhouette looked tense, but he was still waiting for me. When we met, we greeted each other and then fell silent for a few seconds. I felt the air between us was heavy. Finally, he sighed and sat down on a bench, gesturing for me to join him. I was thinking about it, he began, without looking at me. About what you said and what I saw. I understand that this is difficult to accept, I said, trying not to show my excitement. He looked at me, his gaze serious. Why did you even decide to tell me? You could have kept it a secret. Because I couldn't live with it anymore, I answered honestly. Because I wanted to be honest with you. Stephen leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You know, it wasn't just shocking. It was scary. I understand, I said quietly. But... He paused, as if choosing his words. I can't just throw our time together out of my mind. You're a good man, David, even if your actions were wrong. I looked up, feeling hope rising inside me. Are you really sorry? He asked, looking me straight in the eyes. Yes, I answered firmly, and I will never do anything like that again. He looked at me for a long time and then nodded. I need more time to think everything over. I understand, I said. We were silent for a few minutes, just listening to the sound of the wind. Finally, he stood up. I'll call you when I make a decision, he said, looking at me with a slight smile. Thank you for giving me a chance, I replied quietly. The wait seemed endless. Every day I tried to occupy myself with something, studying, taking photos, walking, but thoughts about Stephen still swirled in my head. Early Saturday morning, the phone rang. It was him. David, we need to meet, he said confidently. We agreed to meet again in the park. When I arrived, Stephen was standing by the fountain. His hands were in his jacket pockets, his gaze fixed on the water, as if he were trying to find answers to his questions. Thank you for coming, he began when I approached. We walked slowly down the alley. Yellow and red leaves swirled around us. Fallen branches rustled on the paths. I felt the tension growing with every word he said. You know, I've been thinking about what happened for a long time, he said, stopping. Your actions were a shock to me. I didn't expect that someone could intrude into my life like that. I remained silent. His words were painful, but true. It was wrong, and it took me a while to figure out if I could forgive it, he continued, looking me straight in the eye. You created a situation in which it was difficult for me to feel free. Stephen, I began, but he raised his hand, stopping me. Let me finish, he said firmly, but without malice. I nodded, allowing him to continue. You did badly, but then you found the courage to confess, although you could have hidden everything. This means that you understand how wrong you were." He sighed, as if throwing off a burden. "So I decided to give you a second chance." My heart started beating faster. His words were like a light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. "But it won't be easy," he added. "If we start building something, you have to promise to be honest and not do anything like that again." "I promise," I replied, looking him in the eyes. "Never." His lips curved into a small smile that eased the remaining tension. "Okay, then we'll move on." We walked down the alley again. The conversation smoothly turned into a discussion of the club's plans, the upcoming photo contest. We joked, recalled funny moments related to our studies. When it was time to say goodbye, he stopped and looked at me a little longer than usual. "Don't let me down, David," he said seriously but warmly. "I won't let you down," I replied. He hugged me, tightly, sincerely. This gesture was more important than any words. I watched him until he disappeared around the corner of the alley. My soul was at peace. This was a second chance, and I was determined not to make any more mistakes. "Now everything will really be fine,"